You're walking across your backyard on a Saturday morning, coffee in hand, when you almost trip over it. That old log sitting against the fence since last fall, brown and soft at the edges, a little mossy on top. You've walked past it 100 times, maybe even penciled in a date to haul it away. It's not moving. It smells like wet earth. It looks, by every reasonable measure, finished. But that's exactly what it wants you to think. Science tells a completely different story, one where that log isn't dead at all, but running one of the most complex ecosystems per square inch of anything in your yard. What's happening inside it right now at this exact moment would genuinely change the way you see the ground beneath your feet. This is backyard biology. If that already got you, go ahead and hit like. We're 30 seconds in, and it only gets stranger from here. Subscribe if you want to keep seeing your backyard the way it actually is, not just the way it looks. We do this every week. And before we go any further, what's the oldest piece of dead wood sitting in your yard right now? Drop it in the comments. I'm genuinely curious. Here's what most people assume. A dead log breaks down slowly, quietly, more or less on its own. Maybe a few ants move in. Maybe some mushrooms appear after the rain. The image is simple. Wood gradually turning into dust over the course of a decade or two. But long-term research tells a very different story. At Oregon State University, scientists have spent more than 30 years studying what happens to dead wood, and one of their most consistent findings is how quickly it all begins. Not weeks after a tree falls, but days. Before anything looks different on the outside, the process is already underway. Beetles are often the first to arrive, and they don't come alone. On their bodies, they carry fungal spores deep into the wood, reaching layers that would otherwise remain sealed for years. Those fungi begin breaking down lignin, one of the most durable structural components in wood, releasing stored energy and nutrients as they go. From there, the system expands rapidly. Within a single season, one log can support hundreds of interacting species: bacteria, fungi, mites, nematodes, insects. Each occupies a slightly different space, a different depth, a different role. What forms inside isn't random. It's structured, almost architectural, built in layers that shift over time, and it extends beyond the log itself. In just 1 gram of the surrounding material, researchers routinely find over 1 billion bacterial and archaeal cells. Not an exaggeration. A measured number. Your log is sitting in the middle of that density. When scientists try to estimate how many species can exist within a single rotting log, across all forms of life, the number can reach as high as 20,000. 20,000. But even that number turns out to be the least interesting part. What those organisms are actually doing in there is where things start to feel less familiar. Think about a city. Not a small town, but something dense, organized, constantly in motion. Infrastructure layered on infrastructure. Supply chains moving resources. Neighborhoods specializing in different functions. Signals traveling, conflicts emerging, alliances forming and dissolving at the same time. That's not a poetic comparison. It's the model researchers actually use to describe what's happening inside a decaying log. The fungi in there aren't just consuming wood. They're competing, often aggressively, through chemistry. Each species releases compounds designed to slow or suppress the others, targeted, highly specific, and in some cases potent enough that scientists study them for medical use. In that sense, the log in your backyard is also a kind of living laboratory. What's interesting is that dominance rarely means elimination. When one fungal species gains ground, it usually doesn't wipe the others out. More often, the system settles into a kind of tension, multiple species holding their zones, each applying just enough pressure to keep the others contained. Studies published in Molecular Ecology have identified hundreds of distinct fungal species within a single log, not across a forest, within one. And even that is only part of what's there. The mushrooms you see on the surface after a stretch of rain feel like the main event, but they're closer to a surface signal than the system itself. The visible structures represent only a small fraction of the fungal life inside. Genetic analyses suggest a single log can contain many times more fungal lineages than the fruiting bodies would ever reveal. It's a bit like looking down at a city at night from an airplane. You see the lights, but not the roads, the pipes, the constant movement underneath. You're seeing the output, not the network. And that network doesn't stop at the edge of the log. It extends outward, connecting wood, soil, and root systems, through something most people have heard of but rarely consider as active in their own backyard. What it's doing there, quietly, is where this starts to shift from interesting to something closer to unsettling. Right now, as you're watching this, it's already happening in your backyard. Beneath the bark of that log, and extending outward into the surrounding soil, fungal mycelium is actively growing. Not passively sitting there, not waiting, but moving, in a sense, expanding in response to subtle chemical gradients that indicate where nutrients are concentrated and where they're not. The network pushes outward in multiple directions, forming connections with nearby plant roots, exchanging carbon for minerals, and moving water across distances that individual root systems couldn't manage on their own. This isn't some minor feature of the ecosystem. It's infrastructure. Researchers studying these networks have found that mycelium behaves like a distributed resource system, able to detect changes in nutrient availability and redirect growth toward more productive areas within hours. The efficiency is difficult to ignore. In just 1 gram of healthy soil, there can be up to 200 meters of fungal hyphae, microscopic threads forming an interconnected web. Your log is effectively anchoring part of that network, which may already extend several meters into your yard, linking soil, roots, and organisms you'll never see. And the influence goes further than the network itself. Around 30% of forest species are directly or indirectly tied to dead wood. Not only the organisms living inside it, but entire food webs that depend on what it produces and redistributes. The log isn't isolated. It functions more like a hub. Inside it, another kind of coordination is unfolding. Studies on wood decaying systems show that fungi and bacteria don't compete for the same role so much as divide it. Fungi break down the dense structural components of wood, while bacteria process the resulting compounds. Neither completes the process alone. What emerges instead is a layered succession, refined over hundreds of millions of years. And none of this is happening somewhere distant or theoretical. It's taking place just a few steps from your door. What's less obvious, and far less discussed, is how far this system actually scales beyond that single log. That's where the picture starts to shift again. Here's the layer most people never hear about, even people who care about their yards, who plant native species, who try to make space for wildlife. A log doesn't decompose at a steady, predictable rate. It pulses. The process speeds up and slows down depending on which fungal species happens to be dominant, how much moisture the wood is holding, the time of year, and the chemical signals constantly moving between organisms inside the log and the soil around it. Long-term research led by Mark Harmon at Oregon State University has shown that no 2 logs follow the same path, even when they come from the same tree species and sit just a few feet apart. The first organisms to arrive help determine everything that follows, which means the log in your yard isn't just decaying, it has a kind of biological history, a sequence of events that won't be repeated in quite the same way anywhere else. Researchers at the University of Zurich found that fungal diversity in dead wood is far higher than once believed, and that once a tree dies, it's not simply inhabited by the same organisms it hosted while alive. It becomes something else entirely. A new community assembles from the beginning, with different species, different roles, different interactions. Death in this context isn't a continuation, it's a reset, and what that reset produces is surprisingly dense. In some European forests, a few dozen species of living trees and shrubs can support over 1,000 species of wood-inhabiting fungi once those trees fall and begin to decay. In terms of biodiversity, the living system is only part of the picture. The dead wood is where much of the complexity concentrates. For a significant number of species, roughly 1 in 10, dead wood isn't optional. It's required. Without it, they can't complete their life cycle at all. So that log in your yard isn't just something to clear away. It's a structure that took years to form and supports processes that don't quickly come back once they're gone. And there's one more piece to this, something that shifts it from an ecological detail into something a bit more personal. We tend to treat dead wood as if death is the end of the story. The word itself pushes us in that direction. Finished, done, something to remove and move past. And to be fair, that conclusion makes sense from what we can see. Movement stops. Color fades. The smell shifts towards soil. We've learned to read those signals as a kind of closing, but the science points somewhere else. That log in your yard, the one you've barely noticed, is currently hosting one of the most complex decomposition systems on the planet. Thousands of species, potentially tens of thousands, interacting across scales too small to see. Fungal networks extending into the soil. Nutrients being released, transformed, and redirected into the surrounding plants. Carbon moving through cycles that connect that single piece of wood to processes far beyond your yard. All of that, contained in something that looks inactive. There's something worth paying attention to in that contrast. The natural world doesn't divide things into useful and useless in the way we tend to. What looks like decline from the outside becomes, almost immediately, an opening. And the response is not slow or hesitant, but structured, layered, and remarkably efficient. One researcher described life inside a decaying log as a kind of forest within a forest. Not empty space, but density hidden in plain sight. And once you start to see it that way, it's difficult to unsee. You spend time managing the visible parts of your yard, the plants that grow, the things that need trimming, the areas that are meant to look alive. Meanwhile, the part you almost removed has been supporting the highest concentration of life on your property the entire time. So maybe the question isn't what to do with dead wood. Maybe it's what else has been quietly happening just outside your attention. So let's come back to where this started. A log in your yard, something you almost tripped over, something that looked, by all appearances, finished. Within days, beetles arrived, carrying fungi into its core. Those fungi began competing, chemically precisely, for space and resources. Over time, hundreds of species established themselves inside the wood. Mycelial networks pushed outward into the soil, linking that log to the roots of plants you water and maintain. In just a gram of the surrounding earth, billions of microbial cells continued the process, uninterrupted. What looked like decay was, in reality, a sequence, one layer giving way to the next, building complexity where you expected disappearance. And it doesn't pause when you stop looking at it. Your yard doesn't go still when you go inside. It reorganizes. If this shifted how you see that space, the like button is there if you want to use it. It helps this reach people who've never really looked twice at what's right outside their door. Subscribe if you want to keep seeing your yard for what it actually is. Not just what it seems to be. And before you go, I'm curious. If you had known all of this 5 years ago, would you have removed a dead log from your yard? Let me know. And if you want to explore this a little further, there's more in the description, a deeper look at everything happening just beneath the surface.